This is a leather on softwood trunk with domed stud decoration and also protection by the maker William Chapple, whose roots go back to the late 18th century, where he started off in business at 49 St Paul's Churchyard, opposite Cheapside in London. And he also had connections to George Washington, but we'll come on to that a little bit later. So we can see that it's got a hasp lock here with a key. We've got iron carrying handles to the side, quite plain to the back. You can see where the leather has worn here and here. You've got hinges to support the top, and if we look underneath, you can see the softwood and you can see the sledge feet, which just raise it slightly off the ground. Now, this was going to be made round about 1825 to 1830. We'll come on to that a little bit later as to how we know that. And of course, at this date, they were also making trunks with flat tops. This one, as you can see, has got a dome top. So why has this one got a dome top? Well, that's no good if you're stacking trunks. But what it is good for is if you've got a couple of trunks stacked on top of a coach, you'd have this one on top. And the reason it's domed is because then any rain which you might encounter on your journey, it's just going to run off the top of a trunk rather than sitting there. So a dome top trunk would always sit on the top of flat top trunks on a coach. If we look at the top, we've also got the initials of the owner, MS, done in stud work. But perhaps the most interesting part of this trunk is the interior. And we can see we've got a lovely large label here, and it's lined with newsprint, which has then been overprinted with dots. And it was quite common for trunk makers to buy up cheaply any books which hadn't sold or journals which hadn't sold, and then they would cut out the pages and they would overprint them with a pattern of dots or little crosses or whatever, and they would use them as lining for their trunks. And actually that's brilliant from a research point of view, because every now and again you get lucky and you find a date on the newsprint, or you find a recognizable text which you can then research and you can get a date from that. I'll come back onto that. I've got an awful lot to come back onto. But let's come in a little bit closer and have a look at this label and tell you all about William Chapple. So on this lovely large label, we can see the maker's name here, William Chapple. And we've got lots of illustrations around the outside showing the sort of things that he produced. You've got a new improved leather trunk to the top here. You've got canteens down here. We can see that he also performed funerals, furnished funerals in the town or the country. And we've got his address of number 14 High Holborn. And what's also interesting is that he describes himself also as a camp equipage manufacturer to His Majesty's Army and Navy. It goes on in this script here to list some of the things that he made, and these included gilt red leather, Morocco and solid leather nest of trunks, sea chests, liquor chests in great variety, but also imperial carriage trunks, patent chain belts and luggage straps. So we can get quite a lot of information from that. Now, I said that William Chapple started off at 49 St Paul's Churchyard, and the address that we've got here is 14 High Holborn. And he'd moved to this address by 1819. Between St Paul's Churchyard and High Holborn, he'd also had shops at 85 Longacre and 37 Piccadilly. And labels and trade directories that we have seen for him also noted that he enjoyed the patronage of the Prince Regent. And of course, the Regent States were 1811 to 1820. So we're building up lots of nice dates on a timeline here. 1815, London Postal Directory says he was at 85 Longacre, 37 Piccadilly. By 1819, he'd moved to High Holborn, and the family started to live there as well, and they'd given up their Longacre address. Now, the company was known under 2 or 3 different names, and in fact, there might have been a couple of businesses running at the same time. They were known as William Chapple, as this label says, William Chapple and Son, and also William Chapple Jr. And on the 10th of March 1810, William Chapple Jr. completed his apprenticeship at 49 St Paul's Churchyard. He was no longer an apprentice, he was a bona fide trunk maker. And so we know that by 1810, Chapple was still at 49 St Paul's Churchyard. And here we've got a label which is very similar to the one to the trunk, but you might just notice at the end it says William Chapple Jr. And we took this label off an Anglo-Indian tea chest that we bought, a brass-bound tea trunk. Now, we wanted to buy that trunk anyway, but it was patently obvious to us that it hadn't been made by William Chapple, and somebody had put this label on to deceive, to try and make you think that it had been made by him. So we removed it and have kept it for our archive. But what's interesting, we were talking about the newsprint before and what that can tell you. If we look at the back of the newsprint which has remained on this label, you can see it gives a date of March 1824. Now, this was probably taken off a trunk, and that would then help us to date when this label was used. Now, we can get an idea of date of this trunk from the newsprint as well. So let's just come in a little bit. Now, hopefully you can see this poem, Hymn to the Moon. Now, research has told us that that was published in the New Monthly Magazine and Literary Journal of 1826. So it wouldn't be uncommon for a monthly magazine to have a short shelf life, and then for the unsold magazines to be cut up and given to a trunk maker to overprint like this one. And so the date of 1826 is quite important, and it gives us a timeline for this trunk being made to after 1826, and so we can probably say that it was made between 1826 and 1830, which is quite a nice, tight deadline, really. So back to the George Washington connection. Well, I spoke about lots of things on the label, but I didn't speak about this image in the top corner, which is described as officers' beds and tents. And hopefully you can see that the bed is what we would call a trunk bed. So it folds out of the trunk and packs down very neatly. Well, the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, have got George Washington's trunk bed, and they date that to 1775 to to 1780. If you Google Henry Ford Museum and Washington bed, it'll soon come up for you to have a look at it. But of course, a few people made trunk beds like this. It's not necessarily, Washington's is not necessarily by Chapple, but the Henry Ford Museum have also got a canteen trunk with some of the contents remaining in it, but also belonged to George Washington. And that has got a label to the interior for William Chapple, and it gives his 49 St. Paul's Churchyard address. But what it also says is which is very interesting, is after his name William Chapple, in brackets it says late Garsons. So presumably William Chapple did his apprenticeship with Garsons or worked for him, and when Garson decided to retire, William Chapple took over the business and kept note of the name on his label until his reputation had grown sufficiently. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to research makers from the mid to 18th century, and so we haven't found anything out on Garsons yet. But hopefully we will find some information sooner or later, and then that will add to our timeline on William Chapple and William Chapple Jr. So this might be quite a simple leather trunk, still useful for storing your jumpers in on top of a wardrobe or whatever you're going to use it for. But for us, what's interesting is if you dig a little bit deeper and you look inside and you do some research, the connections and the history and the timelines to the maker and their connections to George Washington all of a sudden elevate this trunk into something which is an awful lot more interesting. So, to sum it up, it's a domed leather on softwood trunk by William Chapple, and we can date it to 1826 to 1830.